Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we re-diving into a massive topic that's shaping our world right now, the recent shift in the G20 presidency, and what it means for a ticking time bomb, the $100 trillion global debt crisis. It sounds complex, but stick with me, because this affects everything from your savings to the price of your coffee. So let's start with the G20. The Group of 20 is a club of the world's most powerful economies. Think of it as the board of directors for the global economy. They meet to discuss big issues like financial stability, climate change, and trade. Recently, the G20 presidency handed over from India to Brazil. Now, why does this matter? Well, the country holding the presidency gets to set the agenda. They decide what A-list problems get top priority for the year. India focused heavily on digital public infrastructure and bringing the African Union into the G20 as a permanent member, which was a huge step for global inclusivity. Now Brazil is taking the reins, and they've made it clear their top priorities are fighting inequality, hunger, and climate change. This shift in focus is crucial because it comes at a time when the world is grappling with an unprecedented level of debt. Which brings us to the second part of our story, the staggering $100 trillion global debt. That's not a typo. $100 trillion. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire world's annual economic output. It's an astronomical number that has been building up for years, accelerated by the pandemic response and rising interest rates. This debt isn't just one big pile of money owed by a single entity. It's a complex web of borrowing by governments, corporations, and households all over the globe. Let's break down how we got here. For over a decade after the 2008 financial crisis, interest rates were at historic lows. Central banks, like the U.S. Federal Reserve, made it incredibly cheap to borrow money to stimulate economic growth. Governments borrowed to fund infrastructure, social programs, and tax cuts. Corporations borrowed to expand, buy back their own stock, and invest. And we, as individuals, borrowed for mortgages, cars, and education. It was a global borrowing binge. Then COVID-19 hit. Governments around the world unleashed trillions of dollars in stimulus packages to keep their economies from collapsing. They sent out checks, supported businesses, and funded vaccine development. This was necessary, but it added a massive new layer to the already towering mountain of debt. Now the party of cheap money is over. To combat soaring inflation, central banks have been aggressively raising interest rates. This is like turning up the difficulty setting on the global economy. For anyone with debt, this is bad news. Suddenly, the interest payments on those loans are much, much higher. For a government, this means more taxpayer money has to go towards paying interest instead of funding schools, hospitals, or roads. For a company, it means less money for innovation, hiring, or even just staying afloat. And for families, it means higher mortgage payments and credit card bills, squeezing household budgets. This is where the real danger lies, especially for developing nations. Many emerging economies are in a particularly tight spot. They often borrow in foreign currencies, like the US dollar. So, when the US Federal Reserve raises interest rates, the dollar gets stronger. This means these countries not only have to pay higher interest rates, but the actual amount of their own currency they need to repay the loan also goes up. It's a brutal double whammy. We're already seeing countries like Sri Lanka, Ghana, and Zambia default on their debts, leading to severe economic crises, social unrest, and immense human suffering. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, has warned that a significant number of low-income countries are either in or at high risk of debt distress. This isn't just an economic problem. It's a humanitarian crisis in the making. So, how does this all tie back to the G20 and Brazil's presidency? The G20 is really the only forum with enough economic muscle to coordinate a global response to this debt crisis. The problem is, it's incredibly difficult to get 20 major countries, all with their own domestic political pressures and geopolitical rivalries, to agree on a solution. Key players like China, which is now one of the world's largest creditors, have different ideas about how to handle debt restructuring compared to traditional lenders like the Paris Club, which is mostly made up of Western nations. These disagreements have led to long, painful delays for countries desperate for relief. Imagine your house is on fire, and the different fire departments are all arguing about whose hose to use first. That's the situation many developing nations are in. Under India's leadership, the G20 made some progress. They launched a common framework for debt treatments, designed to bring all creditors, including China, to the table to negotiate debt relief in a coordinated way. The idea was great, but the execution has been slow and clunky. So far, only a handful of countries have used it, and the process has been painfully drawn out. Now, with Brazil at the helm, there's a new sense of urgency. Brazil, being a leading voice for the global south, is uniquely positioned to bridge the gap between developed and developing nations. President Lula has been very vocal about the need for a fairer global financial system and has put tackling debt and inequality at the very top of his agenda. The hope is that Brazil can use its diplomatic clout to push for faster, more effective debt restructuring mechanisms. They're advocating for solutions that don't just kick the can down the road, but provide real, sustainable relief that allows countries to get back on their feet and invest in their people and their future. This could involve pushing for more comprehensive debt cancellations, especially for the poorest nations, and reforming the lending practices of institutions like the IMF and World Bank. But let's be realistic. This is a monumental task. Geopolitical tensions are high. The relationship between the US and China, the two largest economies, is frosty at best. Cooperation is hard to come by when major powers are competing for influence. Furthermore, private creditors, the banks and investment funds that hold a huge chunk of this debt are a major wildcard. They want to get their money back and are often reluctant to accept losses, which complicates negotiations even further. Any solution the G20 comes up with needs to be convincing enough for these private players to get on board. So, what does this mean for you? Even if you live in a wealthy country, a global debt crisis isn't a distant problem. It creates instability. A wave of defaults in emerging markets could trigger a domino effect, hitting international banks and investment funds, and potentially leading to a global financial crisis, much like we saw in 2008, but perhaps on a larger scale. It could disrupt supply chains, making goods more expensive. It could reduce global demand for products made in your country, impacting jobs and economic growth. We live in a deeply interconnected world. A crisis anywhere can quickly become a crisis everywhere. The next year will be critical. We need to watch closely what happens at the G20 meetings under Brazil's leadership. Will they be able to break the deadlock on debt relief? Can they convince China, the US, and other major creditors to work together? Can they bring private lenders to the table? The solutions won't be easy. They will require bold leadership, difficult compromises, and a recognition that in our globalized world, we either sink or swim together. The fate of the global economy and the well-being of billions of people could hang in the balance. It's a complex and daunting challenge, but one we absolutely cannot afford to ignore. Thanks so much for watching. This is a huge evolving story, and we'll be keeping a close eye on it. If you found this breakdown helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the forces shaping our world. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.